Are you one of those teachers who spends hours grading dozens of assignments? Maybe you literally have stacks of papers that you have to go through when you grade, or maybe you have a bunch of notifications on your online grading software. It's kind of there to remind you that you don't have it done yet. Why do we let ourselves get into this rut? The thing is, the majority of educators are just doing it to themselves. They're making grading way too complicated and convoluted, only to find that it wasn't worth their time at all. Grading adds so much overwhelm and overtime, and it's finally time that we ask ourselves this question. Is all of this grading actually helping us or our students? In today's video, I'm covering 6 ways to cut down on your grading without sacrificing the amount of learning that happens in your classroom. Whether you're new here or returning, hopefully you learn to lovingly tap on the like and subscribe button before you forget, because let's be honest, we're busy people and it slips our mind. So the first way to cut down on your grading is to just evaluate the point of grading. Now, a lot of us, when we went to college and we were learning to become a teacher, they taught us to grade as a way of assessing the students and determining if the students had actually learned. We also use grading as a way of letting the students know how they're performing on certain skills and standards. However, grading has morphed into this way of rewarding and punishing students for their lack of ability, or if they have a lot of ability. It also punishes them for the timeliness of them turning in assignments, and it's more of a reflection of their effort rather than their actual ability or their level on a particular standard or skill. Now, I've seen a wide range of gradebook setups where teachers are counting everything from whether or not a student shows up and that goes in the gradebook, if a student turns in an assignment, if a student has mastered or not mastered a skill. It really runs the gamut. And so you need to ask yourself, what is the point of your grades? Look at your grade book, and if you're more of a veteran teacher or you've been teaching for more than 1 year, go back 2 or 3 years and look at the grades of a random student, especially one that you don't really remember that well. And just by looking at their grades, can you assess whether the student actually mastered the standard, or could you assess where they were on the spectrum in terms of mastery of that standard? Or is your gradebook more about whether or not they fully participated, if they turned assignments on time, or if they were just compliant in general? Now, if you're a newer teacher, let's see if you can find a veteran teacher who's willing to show you their gradebook, which could be kind of hard to do because a lot of teachers are kind of protective of their gradebook because they don't want someone to judge it. But if you can get your eyes on someone's gradebook, take a look at it, and can you assess a student's level of mastery or how much they've learned based on the gradebook? Or can you just tell if they were a student that behaved or misbehaved, was compliant or non-compliant? And the reason I bring this up is because you need to ask yourself, what is my gradebook for? Am I using it to keep track of how much a student puts effort? Or am I actually using it so that I can use it to guide my teaching decisions and decide, okay, these students need more help and these students are right on track, and these other students actually need to be boosted a little bit more because they already know the material. What is the point of grading for you? That's not to say that you shouldn't have some form of tracking system if you want to be able to document if a student is doing the assignments or turning things on time. That's totally fine, especially if you have a student with maybe like an IEP or a student who's struggling. If you can document the times that they weren't able to meet the standard or expectation, that's fine. But does that belong in your gradebook? So the next way to cut down on your grading is to distinguish between assignments and practice activities. Now, when you teach a new concept, a lot of times we follow the I do, we do, you do format, where you model a skill. The students will practice along with you. They'll practice with each other, and then they'll do it independently. And that's when you assess them. So do all the little times that they're practicing and making mistakes, do those actually need to go into your gradebook? Does every single thing that they do in your classroom have to go into your gradebook? So let me challenge you by asking you this, because sometimes we feel the need to document everything because we think that the students aren't going to work if we don't collect it, but that's not necessarily true. If the students know that they're allowed to make mistakes and that it's not going to count against them, they're more likely to try, as opposed to every little thing being high stakes. Especially for those students that struggle or that you're not getting assigned assignments from, sometimes it's because they just don't see it as worth it because they feel like they're going to mess up anyway. They don't have confidence in themselves to even try or practice, so they just don't work at all. On the other hand, if the assignments that go into the gradebook simply reflect what they've learned after they practice it and had a chance to master it and get feedback from you, then they're more likely to put more effort into those and turn those in because you've given them the opportunity to try again. So ask yourself, does every little thing need to go into the gradebook? And what are the most important things that you give out that really reflect their learning? And maybe those should be the ones that go in the gradebook. Similarly, the third way to cut back on grading is to distinguish between class/group work versus independent work. So again, if you're doing something together as a class where you're leading the students and they're basically copying down what you said, do they need a grade for that? Or if they're in a group practicing something that you just taught them, do they need a grade for that? Whose brain is on their actual assignment? Who are you actually grading on that assignment? Them or their neighbor? So maybe if you do want to continue to accept group work as a grade, you can give it a different weight versus independent assignments where they're working alone and you know for sure that they are the ones that produce that work and you can really assess how they're actually doing on that standard or skill. So I'm not saying that you have to eliminate all of the class or group work, but remember, we're trying to cut down on the amount of grading here. If you can get the number of assignments down that you actually have to look at and give feedback and grade, not only will you give better feedback because you have more time, but you yourself are going to be less overwhelmed. So the fourth way to cut back on grading is to look at your previous assignments, maybe from the last year, or if this is your first year teaching, from the last semester, and evaluate what actually needed to go into the grade book. Maybe you did have some assignments that were a little more frivolous that you really didn't need in there, and then make a commitment for future assignments to decide what's going to actually be graded. And you can even communicate this with your students. I do. They'll ask me, are you going to collect this? And I tell them no. Or in the beginning, I tell them that anything that is produced with multiple brains at once, that doesn't get graded because I don't know who did the work. But if they did it alone, that's the one that I grade. And so from now on, when they ask that, I tell them, what do you think? Do you think I'm going to collect this or that this is going to be graded? And they know. Now, if you want to grade exit tickets or anything like that, any kind of pre-writing or a pre-assessment so you get a baseline, that's fine. You can also put that in the grade book, but does it need to have the same weight as a major assignment that they did independently? So that's one thing that you need to assess. What actually needs to go in there? How much weight does it have if you can weight your grades? And what's even worth your time to look at? Remember, if you led them through it and all they had to do was copy it down, do you really need them to collect it, or are you just doing it to make sure that they were paying attention or doing what they're supposed to do, or just basically being compliant? Now, before I get to the fifth one, if you haven't already, be sure to hit that like and that subscribe button, because I'm going to turn all of this grading less and spending less time doing things that aren't fun. I'm turning this into a 4-part series, so be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any video in this series. So the fifth way is a little more controversial. Reflect on whether or not you need to grade an entire assignment. Now, this could save you so much time. And the reason why I say it's controversial is because teachers kind of philosophize about whether or not students will actually finish an assignment if they're not penalized for doing partial work. But hear me out. Let's say that you give students 20 math problems and they only did 10, but you saw in those 10 problems that they did them correctly. Do they really only need to get 50% if they demonstrated mastery? And I'm not saying that you're going to lower the expectations, but maybe you give out an assignment that has multiple parts, but do you really need to grade every single part? Maybe you only focus on the skills that the students needed to demonstrate for that particular standard. Or maybe you just focus on whatever you just taught and that's what you're going to grade. Or maybe you retaught something and you want to see if they got that part down. But it doesn't mean that you need to nitpick every single aspect of the assignment. For example, if I'm having students write an essay, I don't necessarily need to grade everything on the essay, every spelling mistake, grammar, punctuation, explanations, all of that. How I save time time is when I give them an assignment, I'm only going to focus on one thing that I'm going to grade. That might be evidence, that might be explanation, it might be their hook, or a combination of things. Maybe I'm only grading their intro, conclusion, and punctuation, but I'm not going to necessarily focus on grading every little thing because we're trying to save time. I can grade those other things like evidence and explanation on future assignments so I can split it up and save myself some time. So if you haven't already gotten this message from me, I definitely challenge you to ask yourself whether or not your grades are about demonstrating learning or if they're about accountability. Are they about whether a student has met a standard, or are they sometimes a way to punish students? I remember when I started teaching that sometimes I would threaten a bad grade if a student didn't do what they were supposed to do, or if they didn't sit down and be quiet, and I would threaten to lower their grade. And looking back, their grade isn't something that should be used as a pawn. Their grade should reflect what they know. If they didn't behave, or if they didn't do their assignment because they were distracted or they were having a bad day, there were other ways that I could get through to them that didn't have to do with their grades. I soon learned that my grades were reflecting students' behavior, and so the really, really good students tended to have good grades, and the ones who had mastered the material but goofed off had not so great grades, even though they mastered the material. So I just challenge you to ask yourself about what you think the grade book should look like and what should actually be in there. And maybe in the future, you could adjust that. If you don't have time to do that now, that's fine. But you can slowly, little by little, start to make tweaks in your grade book so that you can speed up the grading process and you don't have to spend so much time doing it. And maybe you'll get some pushback from other colleagues who do use their grades in a punitive way, and they don't think that the way that you're grading is really fair because it looks like you're the easy teacher and that they're the mean teacher. But I encourage you to stand your ground. If the way that you decide to change your grade book more aligns with your philosophy of teaching, then go ahead and do that. If you think that everything that I said is crazy and that you do want to use it as a way to punish kids, go ahead and do that. I'm just trying to save you time on grading by grading less, but grading more effectively, and spending more time on the things that actually help you as a teacher and help the students grow and learn. So the sixth way to grade less is to decide how students are going to submit those assignments and figure out how to actually get them to submit, because we all know that that's half the battle right there. That's actually the next part of the series, so be sure to click here to learn more about step 6.